here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome back into the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. We are here in the third round of the NFL playoffs. Championship week is in the books. Another entertaining week, to say the least. Not quite as crazy, but still a little overtime involved and some things that we weren't expecting to see, or some of you may have been, depending on what kind of a prognosticator or fan you are. You had the Cincinnati Bengals taking out the Kansas City Chiefs in overtime, and you had the Los Angeles Rams with a barn burner of a couple minutes there in the final frame to take out the San Francisco 49ers. And Pat, what do you think? You think we're in for a great Super Bowl now that we just have all this in the books?
I mean, if we're going off of the last 2 weeks, I can't see how this isn't one of the best Super Bowls in recent history. I mean, I tweeted something out earlier on our podcast account that the first week of the playoffs, we had 3 games decided by 21 points or more out of those first 6. And then in the 6 games following that, which is both conference championship games and then the entire divisional round, all 6 of those games combined were only decided by 21 total points. So, you know, after they kind of got the bums and scrubs out of the way of the real playoff teams, these guys, I mean, these teams just really, they picked it up. And it's, you know, everybody was saying that the divisional round was probably the best weekend of football in recent history. And these 2 championship games, you know, like you said, one in overtime and then another 3-point victory with, San Francisco, with the Rams going ahead and then shutting San Francisco down on defense to end the game. It just was 2 really good, entertaining, you know, tight games. Both teams that won had to come back a little bit. It was just had everything that you really look for in a championship weekend.
Yeah. I mean, again, wasn't expected from last week to see as far as maybe Cincinnati being able to go in there and be as first half was one part of it, but to regroup and go in there and just take them apart in the second half. And Kansas City had no answer and obviously won the game in overtime. Turnovers were a factor. Mahomes was running for his life. It almost looked like the Super Bowl last year when the offensive line broke down and everything else. It looked like that delayed blitz that they kept running, especially near the end when they looked like they were going to score and that was going to be the game. And you see, you know, everybody's dropped back in coverage and then some 350-pounder comes barreling through and he's running for his life. It's hard to get him off his spot and make him uncomfortable, but it seems like he was uncomfortable the entire second half. And Joe Burrow and those guys, they're playing with house money. So if they win, it's just that much more on top. But they had that swagger, that confidence. And I think I think that's going to carry over to the Lombardi Trophy for the first time being lifted by the Cincinnati Bengals. What do you think, Pat? I mean, the second game, obviously, too, when you look at the Niners and the Rams, you called that dead on last week as far as the score. You said 2017 Rams. I was leaning Niners, and I felt like, you know, obviously that close, it could have went either way. Niners could have, would have, should have. Those are always the hindsight is 2020. You say, well, you know, they make that interception or, you know, everybody's ripping Garoppolo for the bad throw at the end there. It hit the guy in the hands. I mean, you know, it is what it is there. It's still a bad throw, but it could have been a huge play. And then, of course, turns into the pick and that's the game. But I mean, what were your thoughts on that? Do you think Garoppolo is poo like some people think, or are we talking about a guy who just, you know, always gets, he always seems like he's just like the whipping boy because of, you know, the whole being in Brady's shadow and everything else.
Yeah. I mean, I feel bad that Garoppolo gets, you know, kind of the grief that he gets in around the NFL, but he's not here's the thing. Everybody wants a quarterback that is going to be able to kind of put a team on their back and win you a game. And I think especially this generation of football fans, we've kind of unfortunately gotten spoiled by Tom Brady. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't other really good quarterbacks in the league. You know, Patrick Mahomes is a guy that can absolutely take over a game. Joe Burrow seems to be the type of guy who is sort of coming into that type of quarterback as well. But it's like if you don't have that guy, and Jimmy Garoppolo is not that guy. There's no doubt about it. He's not the type of quarterback that's going to, put up some gaudy performance and single-handedly win you a game. But he's generally good enough, and he kept the Niners in this game. I mean, let's be honest. This was not all Jimmy Garoppolo's fault that they lost this game. Like you said, if Jaquiski Tartt intercepts that pass.
God bless you, by the way. Did you sneeze?
We're looking at a completely different, probably a completely different outcome in this game. So, football is, as they say, the ultimate team sport. So you can't put everything on one guy. You can't give one guy all the credit. You can't give one guy all the blame. I mean, I feel like we do that too much with quarterbacks. And while it is, they are the field general, they are the ones in charge. You can't put everything on the back of one guy. When there's 10 other guys on the field with him and 11 more on the other side of the ball, plus your special teamers, as we saw in that 49ers Packers game, it is truly a team sport, and every person has to come to play. And they fell a little bit short, but that's not Garoppolo's fault. Now, do I think that the 49ers are probably going to move on from Garoppolo? Yeah, I do. I mean, his contract is up. They drafted Trey Lance, with the 3rd overall pick this year. So, I mean, I think Garoppolo's time in San Francisco is over, but I don't think that he's a bad quarterback. And I do think that there are plenty of teams out there that would happily sign him to a contract instead of, some of the people that they're, considering, as their starting quarterback for next year. So I think Garoppolo did enough to show that he's a capable quarterback and can win you games. He's not going to be the sole reason that you win games. So I think if he goes to a team that's talented enough, I really think the Pittsburgh Steelers would be a huge landing spot for him. I think it would be good for the Steelers. I think it would be good for Garoppolo. That's just my personal opinion. We'll see what happens in the offseason, but I'm not going to say I'm a fan of Jimmy G. We live in this and we record in this fantasy football world where, stats and numbers sort of dictate how good of a player you are, but the guy generally goes out and wins games, and it's a shame because I do like Garoppolo and I would like to see him get a Super Bowl trophy, but I think the Rams are just a better team. And honestly, I think the Rams are the best team in the NFL, and I think they're going to win the Super Bowl this year. So I think next week when we get into our Super Bowl picks, you and I might have a little disagreement and maybe a little bet to go on in this Super Bowl.
Yeah, when it comes to Garoppolo, I've always felt it's weird. I mean, and you just talked about the team sport concept, obviously being, Philly fans and Eagles won in 2017. And, the quarterbacks take all the win-loss of everything. Out of 52 guys, it's just a quarterback. That's all it is. And I always laugh because, we're going to get into our wide receivers down the road in this episode, which we, talked about in the preseason, how we guessed and how we finished and how their stats go. And yes, wide receivers are dependent upon a quarterback's play to those extents, sometimes their own as well. I mean, Garoppolo, his career numbers, he's got almost a 99 quarterback rating. He's thrown for 11,000 yards. He averages over 8 yards a pass. He's got pretty much a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. And he gets looked at like he's a total joke by a lot of people. I mean, and again, even the Niners had picked Trey Lance, and a lot of that was due to injury. And I know back in the day, I think possibly preseason when we were making picks or during the year when we were talking about getting hot and cold and streaming quarterbacks, that he was a player who, outside of the injury, is really consistently decent, borderline good. Has some bad plays, had some bad throws. Yeah, he'll throw a bad pick, but a lot of quarterbacks do. It doesn't matter who they are. Look at Pat Mahomes yesterday. He considered top one, two, three quarterbacks in the league. Had 2 interceptions, one extremely costly because he got tired of throwing the ball underneath and wanted to try to take a shot downfield into double coverage with an undersized yet speedy wide receiver, and you paid for it. And I mean, that's the same thing where you look at Garoppolo trying to make that little shovel pass falling down, still hit the guy in the hands. It could have made a play. Now, obviously, it's all moot now, but he's one of those guys that gets almost lumped into the same with a Baker Mayfield, who I personally still feel is just slop. And, it does go back to coaching. Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs. You and I watched Andy Reid for how many consecutive conference championships, and that team, play calling and turtling up and things like that, including the Super Bowl that really kind of made things not go our way. And Kyle Shanahan, he's another one who doesn't know when to do the right thing sometimes, and it frustrates you. Obviously, let Brady come back on that Atlanta Falcons team when he was calling plays as a coordinator, and biggest comeback, Super Bowl history and all that. And you see yesterday he gets beaten at his own game when the Rams controlled the clock and ran the football to just dictate tempo and keep it out of their hands. Whereas that's what the Niners wanted to do the whole time. And the Niners were there, and then suddenly they just snuck them at the end and started getting involved. And obviously Cooper Kupp is just what he is right now. But yeah, I do think Garoppolo, he strikes me as he might end up in like a Washington situation, maybe goes to Houston and Deshaun gets dealt. But I think with the right setup and less expectation, he'll have a little bit of time to thrive. The Jimmy G episode is now over, and we will
we'll get into wide receivers now.
We will move on to, yes, the reason that he makes the reason he makes a paycheck. There's guys out there catching that damn football, and we're going to talk about them today. Pat, you want to lead us off and just go back over what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, so we basically have been hitting mostly on guys that either both of us or one of us missed fairly badly on. And as far as our preseason rankings go, kind of looking over our process and maybe why we missed on a guy so badly, in the cases of injury or, something like that. We won't really touch too much on those guys because it's pretty obvious why, we missed on that person. But as far as, just some other guys that we're looking at and reasons maybe why we had another player ranked higher than them or whatever the case is. So let's start off with, and just so that, everybody knows, we're doing this based on the points per game finish. While the overall finish, I think, is important in fantasy football, a guy like Derrick Henry, who was, I'm not even going to say arguably, he was the best running back in fantasy football for the first half of the season. He got hurt in week 8 and didn't play, another regular season game. So a guy like that is just, we know why he finished at, running back 16 or 17 or whatever the case is. But on a points per game basis, he was the number 1 running back in the league. So I'm just using him as an example because he's probably the most recognizable instance of injury sort of cutting a season short. So, we're not gonna dwell too much on the injuries. So the first guy that we're going to get into, the first player that we missed on was the overall number 1 wide receiver this year. And I believe the number 1 overall player in fantasy football altogether, which was Cooper Kupp. He finished as the wide receiver 1 overall, wide receiver 1 on a points per game basis. He was drafted in the 5th round at 503 was his ADP. I had him at wide receiver 21 coming into the season. Rudy, you had him at wide receiver 15. And just as a little side note, well, let's get into it first, and then I'll give the little side note as we go. Kupp pretty much dominated every wide receiver stat out there this year. He outscored the wide receiver 2, which was Devontae Adams, by almost 100 PPR points and 4.5 PPR points per game. He led the league in targets by 22, in team target percentage by 3%. And he was the wide receiver Triple Crown winner, which is, most receptions, yards, and targets. He had 145 catches, 1,947 yards, and 16 touchdowns. I think that, I can't speak for you, but, as far as our discussions in the preseason, I think that both of us thought that the addition of Matthew Stafford would be a major upgrade for this offense as a whole, but I was assuming that both Kupp and Woods, might.
Dude, don't even get me started. Robert Woods was my keeper, and I really felt like I was outsmarting that. Like you said, yeah, you and I talked behind the scenes, and you could see that comment, and it's like, well, Kupp is the reception guy, so he'll get all the underneath work.
Mm-hmm.
But Woods is going to go off and be, finally like 8 for $116 and a touchdown, maybe 2. And by the time he got started, he got hurt. That was it. That was the whole season.
Yeah, he had one good game, and it was the one right before his injury.
Yeah, because I remember trading him. I ended up picking up Jalen Waddle, who, thank God, who was like baby Cooper Kupp, so to speak. Receptions, not as much yards and touchdowns, and then eventually he kind of matured through the season. But Kupp's always been that guy who is a volume guy. Again, we saw another receiver, Hunter Renfrow, who's another guy who's just catch. And if you're playing PPR, forget about it. But to see Kupp do what he did all season long, I mean, he still led the league in yak. Mm-hmm. I mean, number 2 is Deebo Samuel. Number 3 is Jamar Chase. And everybody thinks, deep plays, deep balls are all, Jamar Chase is a name you think of, and maybe a Chris Godwin, Justin Jefferson, and so on and so forth. But yeah, Kupp not only catches it, but he gets himself in a spot that if he catches it underneath, he can get more yards, and he can still beat you on the deep ball, which we saw happen against Tampa Bay 2 weeks ago. It's simply amazing because of, and you look at him and he doesn't look like, he's not a big guy. He's not a Randy Moss or anything on that level. He finished amongst what looks like wide receivers here. He's tied for 3rd with a couple people, but tied for 4th with amount of broken tackles. So to say this guy's matured and turned into that wide receiver that everybody wants, all he needed was just that level of a better quarterback and enter Matthew Stafford.
And some breakfast, apparently.
Yeah, definitely.
In 2019, we saw him finish as the wide receiver 4 with Jared Goff at quarterback. And I think, going back and looking at our process, which is what we're trying to do here as far as getting better at ranking players, taking a little bit more information in each time we do this. Had I looked back and realized how good of a season Kupp had in 2019, I maybe would have ranked him a little bit closer. I still thought Robert Woods was going to have a good season. Points per game basis, he didn't have a terrible season. But as far as wide receiver finishes, Robert Woods has never finished as high as 4, which Cooper Kupp did in 2019, like we said. And I think maybe not realizing Cooper Kupp's athletic ability was my biggest mistake coming into this season, knowing that he had the ability to finish as a wide receiver, a top 5 wide receiver. Probably should have pushed me to not give Woods so much of the credit or so much of the uptick in production, at least from what I thought, and maybe giving Kupp a little more credit as far as what he may have been able to do. I don't think, obviously, there was no one in the world that ranked Cooper Kupp as the number 1 wide receiver coming into the season. I don't think anybody thought.
Matthew Berry might have. He loves Cooper Kupp.
I listened to Matthew Berry. I know that for sure he had Devontae Adams as his number 1 wide receiver, which why would you not? You got Aaron Rodgers, and Adams had been the number 1 wide receiver the year before. So, it's just one of those things where, like I said, nobody expects this. When you have 191 targets and you have the ability that Cooper Kupp has, there's always the possibility that he's going to finish as high as he did. I didn't think he was going to have that many targets, just based on the fact that there were other pass catchers there. I had really like Tyler Higbee coming into the season. I thought they were going to run the ball. Cam Akers gets hurt before the season starts, which, changes some things as far as game plan around probably. So, there's a lot of factors that went into this amazing season that he had. But I think next year, looking at, especially when it comes to the wide receiver position, like you had said, looking at who the quarterback is probably even more important than maybe I even placed, value on going into draft season. But I do think that Robert Woods is still going to have a lot of value next year. And I think the injury mixed with the Cooper Kupp success is going to cause a lot of people to kind of forget about Robert Woods. And I think Robert Woods is going to be a huge, huge value next year in drafts because everybody is going to be jumping on Kupp. And for whatever reason, nobody seems to ever want like the number 2 guy in an offense. But I have a feeling that I'm going to have a lot of shares of Robert Woods next year when it comes to fantasy football leagues, redraft leagues, because I feel like he's going to be a great value next year. All right, let's move on to our second wide receiver that we're going to talk about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, real quick. You've always been big on grabbing Woods. I know that for a fact. But B, and I think what we're both forgetting, I'm literally just thinking about it and looking at some stuff, is what Odell Beckham has brought to that team now, too. I know we're spending a lot of time on this, but again, for Cooper Kupp season in review, Beckham has been much more dominant than Woods in a small sample size. Now you might have all three on the same team next year. I think that pulls targets away from Kupp. Yes? No?
Yeah. I mean, sure. If they decide to keep Beckham on the team, I mean, you know, they're not in trouble as far as the salary cap goes, but
no, they're pretty good actually. Yeah.
I mean, how much is Odell Beckham gonna demand or want or whatever? I'm not 100% sure on what his contract situation is right now. I know, that could end up being an issue, but I mean, I couldn't imagine what the three of them on an offense would look like. Honestly, I mean, that would be crazy.
So he signed a 1-year, $1.2 million, blah, blah, blah contract
with incentives, right?
Yep. So just kind of sliding in. So yeah, he would be a free agent after this year going into his age 30. That could play in. Mind you, if they win that Super Bowl and he's comfortable there and he's, the Odell of old and, he's never been a problem. It's just that people act like he's such a diva. If he's going to play ball and win titles and wants to finish as one of those top all-time guys, I could see him sticking around there. Definitely. Maybe on like a 2-year deal or even another one, see what happens and then go out and get paid. He'll be around for a while. He's always been pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on. We don't want to take up too much time. We feel like Cooper Kupp's gotten enough airtime as far as much as he could get this year anyway. So let's give a little to the guy that he just beat in this NFC Championship game. We're going to go on to Deebo Samuel. He finished the year as a wide receiver 3 on an overall basis. Wide receiver 3 in points per game. He was drafted at the 803. So you got him in the 8th round this year. And you and I were definitely not up at wide receiver 3 for Deebo Samuel. I had him at wide receiver 31. You had him at 25. And on the flip side, strangely enough, and this goes a little bit into maybe my reasoning for not being as high on Deebo Samuel, is I actually had Brandon Ayuk at wide receiver 23. You had Ayuk at 31. So we were almost identically flip-flopped on Ayuk and Samuel coming in. I mean, Deebo came out of just on fire this season, averaging about 10 targets a game through the first 8 weeks. Obviously, Ayuk was sort of, just didn't he the beginning of the season, if you remember, Ayuk just wasn't being used almost at all in some. I mean, he was averaging like 3 or 4 targets a game, but then all of a sudden in week 9 during the Rams game, strangely enough, he had 5 receptions on 5 targets for 97 yards and a touchdown. But then he also added 5 carries in that game for 36 yards and another touchdown on the ground. And then that's where sort of this hybrid phenomenon thing came about. And I don't know if, Kyle Shanahan, like you said, used to be on the staff of the Atlanta Falcons. Maybe he saw the way the Falcons were using Cordero Patterson as this hybrid type player and thought, hey, Deebo's got the same kind of skill set as Cordero Patterson, bigger guy as far as a wide receiver goes. Deebo's always been a guy who just, he plays football like a man amongst boys. Like he's not one of these wide receivers that tries to catch a ball and then go down so he doesn't get hit, or he's not the type of guy that tries to get out of bounds so he doesn't get hit. Like he plays wide receiver like a running back. Like he's trying to deliver blows to these defensive backs every time he touches the ball. Like he's not the guy that's trying to avoid contact. If you look at his entire season, he had 180 opportunities, carries plus targets.
Yeah.
136 total touches. That takes into account obviously the targets that he didn't catch. He had 1,700 total yards and 14 total touchdowns. So, he's right there with Cooper Kupp as far as the yardage and the touchdowns go. Now, obviously, in a PPR league, he's not going to have as many PPR points because he only had 77 receptions, which was like half of what Cooper Kupp had. But, for me personally, I've always loved Debo. I like the way he plays football. I think he's just one of those tough NFL players. Like he's a guy, like I said, he doesn't skirt away from contact. My only concern with him coming into the season was the fact that because he plays so hard, he's kind of been susceptible to injury early in his career. Last year, he missed 9 games due to injury. And to me, it seemed like even then and in his rookie season, he played with that reckless abandon that I just described. And it seemed like that would sort of lead to more injuries in the future. So I was a little skeptical coming into the season. I knew he was talented, but he's also a guy that, he missed about half of the year last year. So it was just one of those things where I felt like with Ayuk on the team as a sort of more standard, wide receiver type of guy, that he was going to sort of be the wide receiver one, and Debo was going to be this guy who, caught those, like you said, like the what you expected from Cooper Kupp, the quick slants and, the hitches over the middle, and guy who wasn't afraid of contact, and maybe even being used on some gadgets, which he had been used on earlier in his career. So that's kind of what I expected Ayuk to kind of be I was expecting more of like an 80 catch, 1,000-yard season from Ayuk, and then Debo to be somewhere more in the neighborhood of like 60 or 70 catches, which is where he was. Not for as many yards, obviously. I was thinking somewhere around, maybe 800 yards or so, and then some rushing, but he obviously, blew all those expectations away. I do still expect Ayuk to learn from this season, from the sort of the benching or the non-usage in the beginning of the season, and be a little bit more involved next year, right from the get-go. But I think I'll still have Debo ranked higher than Ayuk next year, just based on the fact that, the guy is obviously just a beast. And I think any smart coach, which Kyle Shanahan is going to try to make sure that he gets the ball into the hands of his best players. And I think Debo is the best player on that team.
I agree with a lot of it. I think that seeing the dual usage, yeah, definitely. Like you just said at the beginning that, he's almost built like a running back, and that's how they look at him, like 6 foot, 215, imposing either side. Like, if you're out there against a cornerback or if you're making a play out of the backfield and they're looking to utilize one of their best weapons. I think you and I talked beginning of the year that, remember, Brandon Ayuk, you said you had him ranked higher, and he looked to be on paper coming out of last year as that guy that was probably going to hit the next level this year. And then something happened in training camp, remember? And he was like in the doghouse, and you didn't even know he was on the team for the first couple of weeks, I think, of the season. I think Samuel is really like that next level player of, we're going to use you to do both. We're going to have you just make plays. And when you look at his receiving stats overall, like you said, he finished, in yardage, he finished 5th, in the points concepts. And a lot of that was aided by the run, that he finished top 3 at the wide receiver position overall. And he did, his points per game were, right there, and everything else in line. The one thing that I just looked at was that as far as Debo in the red zone, as much as he was used, and you look at your big name receivers right off the bat, inside the 20, inside, right off, I'll go with that stat, like inside the 20. You have Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin, Hunter Renfrow, Keenan Allen, and so on and so forth. And some tight ends will get sprinkled in there too. Way down the line is Debo inside the 20. And he's only 9 targets inside the 20. 5 targets inside the 10 for a wide receiver. And that's scary that, and that could have played into the loss yesterday, is like, how come you're not throwing to him enough if he's that dominant of a player? Now, does that mean that, when you look at regression and progression as far as touchdowns and things of that nature, that he becomes that guy? Well, he had 6 receiving touchdowns. He had 8 rushing touchdowns this year, if I'm looking at that correct. So that's a pretty balanced number overall. But as a receiver, if he's not going to get that, now looking at it, his catch rate was 44% inside the 20, 40% inside the 10. Does that take away from him, or does he try to improve on that? Personally, I think he tries to improve on it. I think he's going to end up being probably one of your best wide receivers for the next 4 or 5 years, as long as they don't beat him up using him too much in the running game. If Ayuk is kind of maybe second fiddle to him and stuff like that, that's one thing overall. You and I just talked, we had our Jimmy G moment earlier. So obviously Trey Lance is probably going to be that quarterback moving forward. He's going to look at somebody like a Deebo Samuel, who is going to get him out of a lot of trouble. I think that the progression for him, if they decide to, San Fran's going to pull back, look at what they did right, what they did wrong. How could we have been better? Blah, 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 blah. We're looking at fantasy stats and we're saying that Deebo, overall in our league of record, NFL.com, a PPR full point with some bonuses clicked in there. But some of his points came from running. I'm sure if you took that away, and again, I did not do that legwork, I apologize, but that would have chopped him down. The running would have chopped him out of a little bit of that top 3 as a wide receiver position. Now, you do have some guys that are a little bit hybrid on that list, but a lot of them are what they are. I think as long as they use them both, if they could use them both ways, it's still going to keep him in that top 3, top 5, 6 conversation. If they try to lean on him more as a wide receiver, which, we looked at San Fran as a running team, and you looked at the different players, they had interchangeable guys, Elijah Mitchell, the injury after injury that played into it. But little did we know, or I guess, behind the scenes, is Deebo Samuel was probably their best running back overall. I think he could get better as a wide receiver, but if Shanahan's still there, and especially if you're going to have, in a sense, a quote unquote rookie quarterback, but a first year full starter in Trey Lance, now it's going to be his team. If they do move off of Jimmy G, that he turns into being the same player. So fantasy wise, he's going to put up the stats for you. But again, I think he has more potential in the red zone as a receiver. But yeah, if he got 8 rushing touchdowns, then it's kind of hard to tell. He's just going to be that guy. He's going to get the points at the position either way. And that's probably that next level. Like, as long as he's getting you that 21 points per game, one way or the other, he's scoring touchdowns. You just don't want to see the regression on the rushing end and not enough added on to the receiving end.
All right, let's move on to we'll move on to Ja'Marr Chase. We actually had sort of all 3 of the Bengals wide receivers. We were going to talk about all 3 of them, so I feel like we could probably kind of hit all 3 of them together. Chase ended up as the wide receiver 5, overall wide receiver 5 on a points per game basis. He was drafted at the end of the 6th round, the 6'11", and I had him ranked as the 29th wide receiver. You were a little bit higher with him as 27. As far as Higgins and Boyd go, you and I were flip-flopped on the 2 of them. I had Higgins at 22. You had him at 32, and then you had Boyd at 14, which was the highest of all 3 of the Bengals wide receivers, and Higgins at 44, which is the lowest. Both of us had Chase right in the middle, which I think was probably a little bit of a hedge for us because we weren't really sure how much use he was going to get coming into an offense that already had 2 pretty good established wide receivers. So I'll let you go ahead and take the lead on this one and sort of explain your rankings for the 3 Bengals wide receivers.
Well, I mean, Tyler Boyd, being the veteran in the room, I felt was probably going to get the most, I guess to say the biggest looks. There was a lot of talk coming out of training camp that like Jamar Chase and to be honest, back in the day for LSU, I really thought he was going to become a great NFL wide receiver. And then he sat out the COVID year of 2020 and didn't play, and then came right out and did what he had to do this year. And we saw that. He had a little bit of a lull midseason, which is understandable. All teams adjust, but when you turn around and see what Tyler Boyd was, like a top 25 wide receiver, everything kind of leaned his way to kind of take over that role in a stronger sense, I guess. And it was hard to tell. Like, you had Burrow. Don't forget, Burrow blew his knee out last year, so that was one thing. You're all over the place. Tyler Boyd was a pretty solid player for that team, and I felt like he had the opportunity to be the guy. Higgins maybe being the second, Chase maybe being the third, Higgins maybe being the outlier. Hadn't seen a lot out of any of them, but when it comes to being wrong, 100%. I mean, because you look into it too much, and then you take a step back and say, well, Burrow and Chase were teammates, and they lit up college football there for a couple of years. So maybe they'll get the band back together and do what they got to do. T. Higgins being the younger SEC wide receiver, he jumped right in and was able to do what he had to do. And this year, Tyler Boyd was just really an afterthought. He was a third wide receiver at best, had a game or two when the other guys were getting covered, that kind of a thing. I don't think they're going to move off him, but I think in a sense of reliability, he's there just for that reason, that if there's an injury, if there's something that goes wrong. But suddenly he's going to be, the old man in the room, so to speak, at 26 going on 27. And that's kind of insane. I mean, he came out of Pittsburgh, highly touted, and you can only do so much with Cincinnati, but he's going to be going into his 7th year. This is kind of that time where maybe he looks to make a move. Like, I'm just trying to take a look and see contract wise with Tyler Boyd, and he's locked in for next season and the following. So they have him until 29. And then after that, he'd be going into his 30th year on this planet as a free agent. I mean, he's a trade chip for them. I mean, almost in a sense too. Higgins was a guy that I remember the Eagles were looking at wide receivers going into that draft. Higgins was already pegged for them. Justin Jefferson was the afterthought. They got neither. They got Jalen Reagor. We know what happens there. But Higgins looks solid. And Jamar Chase is everything it looked like he was going to be. I mean, you look at this offense as a whole, I think all three need to be together right now to get each other over the hump, because you can't leave Boyd open. He's still a solid wide receiver. Higgins makes plays. We know what Jamar Chase brings, home runs and singles and doubles. Like, he can do what he has to do. And then you got to worry about, obviously, again, Joe Mixon has really stepped up this year at running back position and become the player people thought. That whole offense is scary. I think they're probably, to me, pound for pound, they're the best. If their offensive line gets solid, they're the best offense in the NFL, bar none, because you have 3 wide receivers in a passing league with a quarterback. The tight end is Moot Uzomah. I hopefully he is okay over injury, is something you could plug in here or there, but based on the running back, based on the top 3 wide receivers, and you have Auden Tate, who always lies in the background. And anytime the guy needs to get used, can make a big play, but he's just the 4th banana out of all those guys. I mean, next year, it's definitely Chase is still going to be a top 5. Higgins is a top 12 to 15. Boyd, we'll see if he stays with them unless they, decide to use him to get something maybe out of the draft. But if not, Boyd is still going to be a top 25. So to look at an offense that has 3 wide receivers, all potentially top 25. Oh, by the way, the running back's a top 5 running back, and the quarterback is definitely moving up the charts going into next year as probably a top 5 quarterback. I think suddenly Cincinnati Bengals are one of those offenses you're going to, tie your wagons to for the entire season.
Yeah, I think that, going into the season, it seemed like a lot of people were sort of expecting Jamar Chase to have that Justin Jefferson type rookie season, and they were wrong, because he actually blew Jefferson's rookie season away. And I mean, it was just Jefferson held the rookie receiving yardage record for exactly one season. Chase eclipsed that, and along with adding 6 more touchdowns to Jefferson's total that he had of 7. So, as far as a fantasy points perspective is, he completely blew away Jefferson's incredible rookie season. I'm going to be honest, I had my doubts about Joe Burrow's growth coming into this season. This was only a second year. He missed the majority of his first year with that knee injury. The Bengals offensive line was labeled as one of the worst in the league, and correctly, because they are, we saw in that game against the Titans in the playoffs that they were Swiss cheese. And let's be honest, they're the Bengals. I mean, they've been one of the worst franchises in the NFL for a long time. And I just didn't see one player changing that. But to their credit, Burrow and Chase made history and looked like they could have a Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams type of connection for many, many years to come. I will say that I expected Higgins to have a good season, which he kind of did, finishing as the wide receiver 24 overall and wide receiver 13 on a points per game basis. To your point, being a top 15 wide receiver, he did miss a few games. So wide receiver 13 points per game. And Tyler Boyd, for being a number 3, which is sort of where I expected him. I had Higgins as the 1, Chase as the 2, Boyd as the 3. He had a good season as well. He finished as the wide receiver 32 overall and wide receiver 39 on points per game. So I was dead on with those two as far as where Higgins and Boyd finished. I just didn't see Chase having the type of season that he had, and I didn't see the Bengals being as good as they were. So I was definitely off when it came to Jamar Chase. I will say that next year I'm gonna have a little bit. I'm gonna have a lot, just like Robert Woods. I'm gonna have a lot of shares of T. Higgins, because I think that as good as Jamar Chase is, you got to remember going into next season, you're gonna have to pay a premium for the guys who finished high this year. So I'm actually keeping this notebook that I'm doing my notes in now, and I'm going to go back and look at this before I rank players next year and before I draft next year. And I'm going to, try to remember which players are going to be draft day values, because say you're in the second round and you have a choice between, Cooper Kupp and Jamar Chase and, Tyreek Hill, let's say, or something like that. Any one of those 3 guys would be a solid pick early in the second round. But you have to look at, what can you get later on in the draft that is going to return the type of value? Because when you're picking in those first few rounds, you're looking for guys that are almost surefire hits. And I think, again, when you're looking at, team value, Chase is obviously the wide receiver that you want, but he's the one that you're going to have to pay the most for when it comes to, your draft capital. So I'm going to have a lot of Robert Woods. I'm going to have a lot of T. Higgins. And I think I'm going to be pretty happy with how that sort of plays out as far as, getting value on those wide receivers later on in the draft. All right, let's move on to our next wide receiver, who was Deontay Johnson. He was a wide receiver 8 overall, wide receiver 9 on a points per game basis. He was drafted in the 5th round at the very end. 512 was his ADP. I had him much higher than you did coming into the season. I had him at wide receiver 18. You had him all the way down at wide receiver 41.
Yeah, I thought Juju was going to be the guy.
That's it? That's your whole explanation? All right. We'll move on.
Well, not totally, but mostly, yeah. Don't forget, he went out early, and then they just threw it all to Deontay. It was like, give the ball to Will. Like, that was it. They had not a lot going on. It took a while for Freiermuth to develop as a bit of a target and reception guy, and sneakily he's another guy going into next season, tight end wise, is really going to be understated depending on who quarterback is. But no, Deontay Johnson, yeah, like we knew he was going to be a good wide receiver, but wasn't expecting him to get the load as quickly as possible. If Juju's there, he's going to cut into, his target share of 169, which tied for second in the league with Devontae Adams. He's going to chop, 40, 50% out of that. I mean, based on what he's theoretically commanding, that's going to cut into his stats. But now that they see that Deontay Johnson can be the guy, And again, I did not see that. And, not knowing that he could be that guy at the same time, yeah, 100%. I was dead wrong. But a lot of it led to the fact that it was going to be a little more of a spread offense with two wide receivers. And, they were going to maybe lean on the passing game. Najee Harris might play into it. But that was it. That's all I got. Just say, no offense. I mean, we're just talking about three wide receivers on the same team that if one goes down, T. Higgins is going to suddenly become Jerry Rice. And I get that. Now, at the same time, Diontae Johnson with a good year or two under his belt is now going to be the guy. Yes. But knowing that Juju was going to command a little bit of that. Now he's not, maybe he's not, who knows, coming back. He was ready to play coming back from injury in the playoffs and all, and you don't have Ben. So who's the quarterback? As much as you want to rip Roethlisberger for not being able to throw the ball 5 yards or whatever, obviously, he still contributed to Diontae Johnson's receiving season that he had.
Yeah, well, to your point about Juju Smith-Schuster, last year, Smith-Schuster was healthy for pretty much the entire season. I don't think he missed a single game last year. Diontae Johnson actually missed the last 4 games of the season and still finished with 144 targets, which was, I believe, 6th in targets in the NFL. And I think last year you could see there were, Johnson had that issue with the drops at the end of the season, and
people were a little bit this year too.
Yeah, which every receiver is going to drop passes here and there. Yes, he did have a little bit more in some bigger spot. He had a big drop in that playoff game yesterday. I know. So it happens. Listen, man, you lacking concentration for whatever reason, it just happens. But as far as my like for Diontae Johnson, I did feel like he was going to finish in the top 5 in targets. As far as what you actually do with those targets, nobody knows how that's going to go. But I feel like as long as you're getting those opportunities, you have an opportunity to finish, like you said, he finished 2nd in targets, tied for 2nd. He finished as wide receiver 9 in points per game. So obviously his targets were not as high value as a guy like Davante Adams, who finished with the same amount of targets, but finished as the wide receiver 2. So, obviously all of that stuff comes into account. I will say again, and I'm trying to look at all of these players, looking at what we did this year, looking at, where they may be next year. I will say that if the Pittsburgh Steelers do not do something at the quarterback position, I don't think I'm going to be as high on Diontae Johnson next year as I was this year. I just can't see your cousin Mason, being able to throw him the ball as effectively as Ben Roethlisberger did. So I'm just not I'm not going to be a huge fan of Diontae Johnson next year. As good as he's done these last 2 years, the quarterback is going to matter and the offense is going to matter. And Pittsburgh's offense was not good this year. And if they don't replace Ben with a more serviceable quarterback than, like I said, than Mason Rudolph or who's the other guy they have that they
Dwayne Haskins.
Haskins, yeah. If they don't do something with that situation,
get Jimmy G. There you go. Boom. Steelers Super Bowl done, and Juju's going to be the lead.
Put it in the book.
Just saying, done. We figured it out. Next year, put your money on the Pittsburgh Steelers going into next season.
Thank you for whispering that, by the way.
I don't want it to get out. I want to make some money. I don't want the line going up.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. So let's move through the rest of these guys fairly quickly, because I do feel like we're kind of spending a lot of time on each of these guys. And we do have a few more that I want to make sure that we get to. So let's kind of speed this up a little bit.
We grouped Cincinnati, so we're done, right?
Yeah, that's it. We're completely done. We can just sign off.
Yes.
The next guy that we're going to talk about real quick is Adam Thielen. He finished as the wide receiver 28 overall. Finished as the wide receiver 17 on a points per game basis. However, obviously because of the injury, he still finished the year, even with only 95 targets. He still finished the year with 10 touchdowns. His ADP was, sorry, I skipped that. His ADP was 8th round, 3rd pick, so 803. I had him at 34. And you had him at wide receiver 13. So you were pretty close on this. You had him, as 13. He finished at 17. So I'll go first since I was so far off. I was low on Thielen coming in basically for 2 reasons. One, I thought his age was going to finally catch up with him. He's, he came into last season 30, but I believe he's 31 years old now. And I thought Jamar Jefferson's outstanding rookie season was going to demand more targets. And I think, it wasn't until Thielen got hurt that the Vikings finally decided, like, oh, we need to throw the ball to Jefferson a lot more. In the games that Thielen and Jefferson played together, Jefferson averaged 8.9 targets per game. Thielen averaged 8.2 targets per game.
You just hate saying you're wrong.
No. I was off on Thielen. I think that, honestly, had Thielen played the entire season, I feel like he would have finished a lot higher than where he did. I think that wide receiver, being a top 12 maybe wide receiver with the way things were going, I think was completely feasible. I'm going to say that I was completely off on Thielen. I felt like Jefferson was going to take over, for a couple different reasons, and he just didn't. And I that's a credit to how well Adam Thielen kept himself in shape and how well he's still, playing football as a 30-plus-year-old wide receiver.
Sounds like you're a bit of a fan there, buddy. I mean, my thing is he's a borderline tight end. Like, he's just that guy. He's not going to get you yak, and he's not going to go downfield 48 yards before he makes his reception. But he's going to get you things that are imperative to your team being part of, moving downfield, so to speak. And we saw Minnesota, Kirk Cousins and all them, Minnesota offensively throughout the season, even after, Thielen's injury, with Dalvin Cook, with Jefferson, with Thielen, Ty Conklin playing like a nice spot there, and KJ Osborne filling in nicely. Like, their offense moved the football. Their defense couldn't stop anybody. If they had a little bit of action on defense, they probably would have made the playoffs. I mean, they were hanging around at that point. And what Adam Thielen brings you is a possession receiver. He finished top 20 in receptions per game. And that in a PPR sense is exactly it. His volume is going his way. Like, he's getting targets, but even when he doesn't, he's still making the most. He's not dropping. He catches 70% of the balls thrown his way. Where Jefferson is obviously way more dynamic playmaker. Absolutely. But Thielen, and I know what you're saying, the age and the injury, he's probably got 3 really good years left of the same production, as long as there's not nagging injuries. He's a few years back, I remember taking him because he was up on the list, and I can't say I'd heard of the guy, coming out of college. Yeah, he's a good NFL wide receiver. Now, I did expect him to A, make it through the whole season, and that offense, B, become way more dynamic, to know that he was there in a points concept, but not in a totals concept. Probably would have broken through on some of the other stats. I think different factors hold him back. And again, he's going to play off of Jefferson a lot more. I still feel like he's, depending on, what kind of league you play in, PPR alone, like he's got to be on your radar, and he's got to be one of those guys like you just talked about, like draft day values.
The next wide receiver we're going to talk about is Brandon Cooks. Cooks finishes the overall wide receiver 19, points per game, wide receiver 20. He was drafted right behind Thielen, and the 901 was his average draft position.
Almost the same guy. Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
You had him at wide receiver 46. I had him at 35. So we were both much lower on Cooks. I just thought, with all the turmoil that was kind of going on in Houston, coming into the season, the whole Deshaun Watson thing, the coaching change, I felt like it was a situation that was just, I didn't really know what was going to happen. I wasn't sure on the running backs, and we had that whole discussion, in the preseason as far as running backs go. But once again, Cooks produced like he does every other year. I mean, the knock on him is that he's never going to be, these guys that we were talking about earlier, like your Jamar Chase and your Justin Jefferson type. He's just not going to lead the league in receiving yards or in touchdowns. That's not who he is. He's just a steady, solid wide receiver who's going to get open and who's going to catch the ball when you throw it to him. for his career, he averages 109 targets, 71 and a half receptions, just under 1,000 yards per season, and just under 6 touchdowns per season. So, again, he's not going to be your Devontae Adams. He's not going to be, he's never going to have a season like Cooper Kupp had this year. That's not who he is as a person. But as far as his points per game and his points per season, he averages over 200 fantasy points PPR pretty much every season except for his rookie season, and there was a season where his season was shortened by injury a little bit. It was the only 2 seasons he didn't have at least 200 fantasy points. And
I remember
he's
one
just
season
quarterback proof. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I remember one season it ended in injury. I believe it was the Super Bowl. Malcolm Jenkins knocked him out cold. Yes.
So, what are your thoughts on Cooks for this year and next year?
I mean, some of his game was played on speed. I mean, again, he strikes me as like he's always been like a bigger version of like a Deshaun Jackson, not with that full top flight speed, but a fast, speedy guy, going to make plays. Obviously, New Orleans had him for a little bit and then dumped him off to New England. And again, we just talked about what happened there. Rams had him for a couple. This season, seeing him in his second year as, a wide receiver on a bad team. Now, in 2020, you had Deshaun Watson, and he put up 81 catches, 1,150 yards. Deshaun Watson on a 4-12 team, I believe it was, borderline MVP numbers, but wasn't going to happen based on a bad team. And then you see him with Tyrod Taylor, my boy Davis Mills, still putting up 90 receptions, 1,000 yards. So he's become like a quicker possession receiver, obviously, and in the system he's in, which is kind of interesting. I like him a lot. I was trying to get him in our league this year hard. And of course, the owner of him was just not having it because I didn't have enough to put him up there, to take him off their hands, so to speak. For me, he's everything I want in a fantasy wide receiver. And again, I know he's not top 5, he's not top 10, but that consistency of what he gives you, like just over these last 2 years, it's not a matter of, do I start him based on the matchup? And you're hemming and hawing and you're not sure maybe on your wide receiver 2 or any. He's a plug and play guy right now. And you need that based on what he brings you. I mean, you had a few of those guys this year, but DJ Moore finished ahead of him in receptions and stuff like that. But I'm going to, and yards, I'm going to start him over DJ Moore because I just feel like he's going to give me that much more consistently on a personal level, more than even the points and everything else. I know DJ Moore, like a lot of his was like big games and stuff, but down the stretch, quarterback play and different things dictated stuff. So, overall, he was what he was. Me personally, I like a Brandon Cooks. And when you look at a points per game, did he edge out, DJ Moore? Yeah, he did on a points per game level. And to me, that 1 point could be a matter of whether or not he's your guy or not. But like I said, I totally love a player like him. I would love to keep him on my roster as much as possible.
All right, let's move on to DK Metcalf. He finished the season as the wide receiver 16 overall, wide receiver 24 on a points per game basis. He was a second round pick. His ADP was the 206. I had him all the way up at wide receiver 6. You were much closer on where he actually finished at wide receiver 19. And I really thought with his physical stature and prowess, he was going to eclipse Tyler Lockett as the number 1 target this year. I just felt like he was sort of the trajectory of their 2 careers was on opposite ends. Lockett was coming down, Metcalf was going up, and I just kind of felt like this was going to be the season where DK Metcalf kind of really showed out. But, to Tyler Lockett's credit, he was still incredible. He still led the team in targets. He was still seemed to be Russell Wilson's, go-to guy. The only thing that really saved Metcalf's season and kept him in that top 24, wide receiver 2 range was the fact that he had 12 touchdowns, which I think, when you're talking about DK Metcalf, you're always going to have the opportunity to get a double-digit touchdown season for him just because of his size and because of his speed. I just think that while, the 3 of them are together, Lockett, Wilson, and Metcalf, I don't feel like Metcalf is ever going to get the separation in the target numbers that he needs to be an elite wide receiver. I think that 6 was definitely too high for him. I had too big of a gap between him and Tyler. And I think next year that is going to be a lot closer as long as, as long as those 3 guys are all still on the same team. I feel like that's a much more prudent and safer route to go with ranking Metcalf and Lockett moving forward.
You got to catch the football. I mean, to me, that's part of it. Like you just said, physical attributes. Absolutely. But if I'm going to look and see that DK Metcalf, just based on 129 targets, caught 75 balls, that's 58% catch rate. Still ended up under, just a hair under 1,000 yards. The amount of, 12 yards, almost 13 yards a catch, 12 touchdowns. Imagine if he caught more footballs. Like there wouldn't even, I don't even know if you'd be talking about Cooper Kupp right now. Like, it's almost to that level. Now, there was a bit of a Russell Wilson injury during the season that definitely factored in, where Geno Smith became the guy for a little bit and that whole offense stagnated. And when it comes to offenses, to me, the first rule of the 9 route is we don't talk about, Tyler Lockett, but that's just me. At the same time, that whole offense is just an enigma to me. People love the quarterback and I don't. People love Lockett, and I bought into that. Nah, he still finished pretty solid this year. Whether or not they were playing off of each other based on talent, Lockett became less of the home run hitter and more of the consistent wide receiver. That was also kind of like a little bit of a head scratcher for me. I really don't know what to think. I would personally, if you're drafted next year and you come into these guys are hanging around and I got a bunch of murky people, period. I mean, I'm literally looking at an ESPN 2021 fantasy football draft kit. And I'm going to look down the list, and wide receiver 6 is DK Metcalf. And
I swear I didn't cheat and copy that.
Wide receiver 23 is Tyler Lockett. So the fact that they're basically flipped, and there's still talk of Russ leaving, which then that would be another quarterback vacuum. I personally I want consistency. It's not that I want to so much be the Ronco, set it and forget it. I don't want to just be that person, but I want to feel confident in who I'm picking. And to see Metcalf go from looking like he had so much upside and then fall back a lot. And again, to see that catch rate being a factor, could have been bad balls. I'm not keeping track on Seattle Seahawks. I'm not. I can't sit there and do that. But to know that Lockett chopped into that a little bit too, and everything else in between, for fantasy purposes, I get it. But I'm not going to. I'm not going to look at 2 wide receivers that almost seem to cannibalize each other. Again, based on the quarterback, and again, they have the running game. There's just like, you want to talk about question marks. That's like a question on a question on a question. I would stay away. I don't like either guy. I don't like the situation there. I don't like the coach. This year, they finally, all their flaws were revealed, and yeah, they couldn't make the playoffs. And I know the injury played into it, but to be that team that's always so bleh, I can't do it.
All right, so we got 2 more guys to talk about. Let's kind of get through these guys fairly quickly. First one is A.J. Brown, finished as the wide receiver 30 overall.
wide receiver 26 on a points per game basis. He was drafted in the second round as 211 ADP. I had him all the way up at wide receiver.
I remember this from preseason.
You had him down at 17.
You were in love. You and AJ were going to go get a room together. And I was like, yo, look, I'll take you to dinner, but I'm not paying for it either. We're going to pay half, but I'm not. Yeah, we're going Dutch. I'm not treating.
Well, obviously, as you so eloquently stated, I was extremely high on Brown coming into the season. I thought the addition of Julio Jones would really open things up for Brown, take some of the coverage away, as well as, Derrick Henry in the run game, sort of giving them, more advantageous passing situations. And I really expected Tennessee's passing offense to be like a top 5 or 6 in the league this year. And they just weren't. I mean, it was actually just the opposite. They were top 5 in rushing. And even with Henry missing half of the season,
yeah, definitely.
They were bottom 12 in the league in pass attempts, passing yards, attempts per game, yards per completion. I mean, all the passing stats that matter, passing touchdowns. I think they were 13th or 14th in the league. It was just, I mean, I still think Brown has the talent to be a top 12 wide receiver, but on this team with this coaching staff, this personnel, I just don't think that he's going to have enough targets to be a guy who has the opportunity to finish inside of the top 6, let's say. He'll still be, a super solid wide receiver too. We're talking about, DK Metcalf. I think AJ Brown is one of those guys who's in a very similar boat when it comes to the situation on his team. I don't think Ryan Tannehill is a top tier type quarterback. I think, the way you think about Russell Wilson, that's how I think about Ryan Tannehill. He's a guy. He's a Jimmy G. He's a guy.
No, he's pretty bad.
You think Ryan Tannehill's worse than Jimmy Garoppolo?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I disagree, but that's news to me. I thought that you liked Tannehill.
After this season, watching him not be able to, again, the injuries played into things, but to see that playoff performance, to see him not be able to adjust. It was one thing in Miami, and I know he had a nice minute there in Tennessee. To me, you can't come up that small in a home playoff game coming off a bye, and your first and last throws are interceptions. Sorry, no. And I know Garoppolo's last one was a pick. I know it was, but I would take Jimmy G over Tannehill probably 9 times out of 10.
Fair enough. All right, the last guy that we're going to get into is Amari Cooper. He finishes the wide receiver 27 overall, wide receiver 30 on a points per game basis. He was being drafted at the 408, and I had him up really high. I had him as the wide receiver 10. You had him dead on at wide receiver 30. For me, I think my expectations for Dak Prescott sort of flowed into my expectations for Cooper, for Lamb. I mean, I know that you and I were pretty close on where we had CeeDee Lamb ranked. I think at 15 and 18. I had him at 15. You had him at 18. And he finishes wide receiver 20, 21 on a points per game basis. So we were both really close on where Lamb finished. I just really thought that Cooper would lead this team in receiving. He's always been talented, and kind of like AJ Brown, I thought the other talent around him at wide receiver would open things up more for him. I was obviously wrong on that one. He actually ended the season 3rd on the team in targets behind Lamb and Dalton Schultz. He was 2nd on the team in yards with 865 and tied for 1st in receiving touchdowns with 8, but he wasn't the dominant alpha receiver that I thought he was going to be. What I correctly thought was going to be one of the top 3 offenses in the league. I just had a really high expectation for the Dallas offense, which was met, but I guess they spread the ball around a little bit more. All 4 wide receivers, if you include Cedric Wilson. The tight end got involved. Obviously we talked about Dalton Schultz a little bit in our last episode. Both Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott were involved in rushing. Zeke finished as a top 10 running back this year, as far as on the total. So I think that the Dallas offense was just spread out a little bit more than I expected it to be. And I think that moving forward, I think all the good offenses
are sort of built that way. And I think that moving forward, I have to take that more into account when ranking Lamb, Cooper, Zeke, everybody. I think that that's something that I have to pay a little bit more attention to next year.
And a lot of mine was A, Lamb, and B, I was low on Dak, whereas you were not. But again, that was the injury factor, recovery playing into it. So to say I lucked out a little bit, the wild card was Dalton Schultz. And you just said he just finished second in targets, right? Be ahead of Cooper.
Yes, by one.
Yeah. So the fact that he was utilized that much where, if you give another 30 of those targets that Schultz got to Cooper based on number one, I think Cooper's always going to hold the best cornerback probably on the team. As much as Lamb is so dynamic as a wide receiver who can play underneath, can get deep, he's going to be their guy. They're going to have your shadow coverage or things like that, because quietly what Cooper does give you, and I shouldn't say quietly, but overall, he's really a solid player for that team. Like, he's a top 25, top 30 when it comes to like red zone targets, things of that nature. He's always going to be that guy for them. And if that's the case, then it's going to be a lot harder for him to get open and get touchdowns and make plays while still putting up stats in an offense now that will spread it around. So again, and you mentioned Pollard too. So now you're talking about 1, 2 running backs, 1, 2, 3, Cedric Wilson, obviously filling in for Gallup, 3 to 4. You have like 6 to 7 mouths to feed on that offense. He's going to fall back a little bit while still being a constant. Again, almost like in a fantasy sense, that guy you can depend on and lean on. Hey, Coop, Dak in the huddle. You got to get open, man. I need you on this play. I know you got this guy. And it's some fade post to the corner, and he jumps up, makes the play, and gets a touchdown. He's going to quietly turn into that guy. Whereas Lamb's going to be the more dynamic guy, Schultz the underneath, and the running game, and that'll be what it is. But going into next year, 4th round pick, I think that's going to creep closer to 6th round, depending on, how different rookie wide receivers, let alone rookies overall, filter in and drop themselves into the draft. Because I think after Jamar Chase's season, you're going to see some people definitely start to dive a little bit more into, a rookie wide receiver too.
Yeah, absolutely. With Jefferson and then Chase both coming out and breaking the rookie yardage record back-to-back years, I think that there's going to be a lot of, even in redraft leagues, I think there's going to be a lot of people clamoring for whatever the big name wide receivers are coming out. All right, well, I think that's it for us for this week, folks. Thanks for listening to the 9 Route podcast. Make sure that you click that little plus and follow us. We're looking to get into our running backs next week, find out where we went wrong on some of our calls at the running back position. Anything you want to throw in there, Rudy, before we head out for the night?
Oh, like you said, we'll dive into our season in review on running backs, and we will make our Super Bowl predictions. We're going to talk overall, money lines and point spreads and over-unders, maybe a prop or two if we're interested. We'll see. We'll take a look at some of those based on what we see, again, for entertainment purposes only. Not that you would wager anything on those personally, but again, we'll look at that and yeah, running backs season in review, and then look to get ahead for the 2022 season. Clock's already ticking, folks. So get ready. We appreciate everybody out there listening. We thank you again. It's been a great NFL season. This is our first year. We really love doing this, and we really love that you all listen and like and subscribe. Give us that plus on the podcast. And again, 2022 is going to be a bigger, crazier year for the NFL, and so that means that's going to trickle down to us here at the 9 Route.
All right, until next week, folks. Peace.
Peace.